So we have 3 women here who have, as it says on the program, been there and done that. I bet you really do want to hear from very successful founders, right? These women founded their own companies, and actually Andrea is also with 500 startups, and Kabam is a big company, right? And a gaming company. I mean, how often do women found companies like that? So we're going to have a very exciting time learning lots of things from these ladies, and I just want to start out by having you each introduce yourselves really briefly. Holly?
No problem. I'm Holly Liu. I'm one of the co-founders of Kabam. We started almost about 10 years ago, so it's been a long time. We started in 2006. We grew the company to over $1 billion in valuation and sold it just recently. I don't know if people know that. But
Congratulations.
And then we raised about $245 million, a good amount. And basically what we do is we do games on the mobile phone. So if you have a little boy in your life, they've probably played one of our games, but we partner a lot with Hollywood. So our largest game is Marvel Contest of Champions. It's a fighting game where you can pick your team from all the Marvel characters and just live your dream of being in the Marvel universe. So we've been around for a while. We grew to over 1,500 employees in 6 offices around the world. So lots of white hair, lots of extra poundage as a result of that, but happy to talk about all of that. And actually, Shanna was at Google Ventures. I don't mean to steal your thunder, but they funded us as well. So thank you.
Okay, Andrea.
Hi, everyone. Oh. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Mike's, can I borrow that from you?
Yeah, so just leave them on.
Hey, everybody. My name is Andrea Baraka. I started a company called InDinero with my co-founder, Jessica Ma, back in 2010, so 7 years old. I actually left that company 3 years ago to go to the dark side. I started going into thinking about venture capital and wanting to learn the ins and outs of investing. So I spent 2 years as entrepreneur in residence and venture partner at 500 Startups, where I was a pitch coach. So I was a storytelling coach for companies. That's one of my specialties. And I also got to travel all over the world and find great companies to invest in. So, you know, we at 500 Startups don't believe that talent's just in Silicon Valley. It's all over the world. So I got to spend time traveling to Brazil, West Africa, and various places, making some of our first investments and like scoping out great companies there. But some news, it's not on the slides, but I've actually left 500 Startups for the last 8 months, and I've started my next company because after you're in the dark side for a bit, you got to go back in the trenches. Definitely, I have fellow. Oh, no, we're all aligned. We have a lot of. We were in the back just talking about gotta get in the trenches again. So I actually jumped in the trenches, made a little bit of a switch from fintech. I am starting a sex tech company. It is called O School, and we are shame-free pleasure education online.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you. We're not launched yet, but it's called O School.
Everybody's waiting for it. Shanna.
I don't know if this one's working either. I'll do this one. So they've kind of told my background for me.
Hold it up a little.
Oh,
there you go.
Can you hear me? So they've told my background a little bit for me. That's a great way to start. So previous company, actually, we side mention, we used to host game jams here at the Microsoft campus in my last startup. And they were wonderful incubating us. So my previous company was also a 3D gaming company acquired by Autodesk, and then also left for sort of the other side of the table, dark side, venture capital. Fantastic experience. I joined Google Ventures for 2 years as a partner. Loved it, but felt like I needed to get my hands in and suffer the pain again of starting a company, and left 2 years ago to start a company called Modsy. We help you visualize how home design and furniture will look in your home before you buy it, using 3D visualization. And we're 2 years in. We just launched in September and off to the races.
So this audience is, I'm sure, fascinated by the whole subject of funding. There aren't too many VCs in this room. I know one or two. But when you went for funding, did you go for venture money, having been in venture yourself? And did you pitch men or women, and did it matter?
Wow, that's That's a lot of questions.
Be honest. Be honest. Tell us the truth.
Both of my companies were venture-backed. The second one, much more thoughtfully and intentionally so. The first one, because people told me that's what you should do when you start a company. And I didn't really understand what the relationship meant. So one of the useful things about becoming a venture capitalist for a little while is understanding what scale of magnitude you have to build towards in order to have a company that makes sense for somebody to invest in and have an outcome. So yes, I raised venture capital for both companies. This one a little over 10 million to date, and maybe not half, but like 30-ish% of our investors right now are women, which is amazing. That wouldn't have been possible, I don't think, my first company.
Maybe not.
Feels like more. Even though it's still small, there's slightly more women who are getting into venture capital. Huge difference for me personally. I just feel like my connection to the women I was pitching was more authentic. They were kind of like, there's this old boys network concept, right? But it just felt like I knew them already, and I did know most of them already, and it was more friendly and a lot more comfortable. I knew some of the men too, and it felt the same way, but a lot of them I didn't know, and you don't have that same instant connection to men when you're a woman, and so it made a huge difference for me.
And so do you think it actually changed the outcome, like due diligence was different, or the round size was different, or anything like that?
It's hard to know because you can't compare it.
True.
I think that the second time, not as much, because I built a reputation. The first time, I think that I didn't get the same sort of credibility or sort of level of just like, we're going to have faith and take a risk on you as I got the second time around. And it was because I do think being a female gave me some limitations.
Yeah. And so, Andrea, do you want to comment on that as well?
Sure, I can talk on both sides. So Jess, my co-founder of InDinero, did most of the fundraising. We had mostly male investors. This was 2010. We had a few great female investors, but especially in fintech, you get like that added level. Like not every industry is like the same in terms of the types of investors you can get in front of. I can say that it was definitely like a surprise to me when I went to the other side of the table how the way that women pitch, there's a very difference. Like I can give both of
please.
People would always like seek me out for industries, and now and like the other side that I'm back in again, it's interesting that we assume that like, oh, if I can just pitch more women, if there are more investors, it'll be easier. That's actually not been my experience. I think that there are lots of ways that like when you make it as a female investor, it's just as difficult because you have now to like pitch a bunch of partners at the firm, right? And so you don't want to be like that one woman founder that only found like, so I'd have to like extra like pitch. And I found this and I was like, man, I really want to fund women, and I did many times at 500 startups. But there's almost like an extra level of risk, and it's not just the women partners in a fund's job to fund women. I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
Right? You shouldn't like, we need more women funders and we need more women operators to become like funders, but it's not their job. So like, I think that's like
their job is to do the best.
Right, exactly. And I felt that too. And it's like, ooh, like I actually, like for example, I got all the fashion deals and I'm like, oh my God, like I you know what I mean? Like, and I was like, this is not, I built an accounting software, So it was kind of, that was a problem. And then now I can say that I'm in this industry where I think sometimes it really helps to have women in the room when you have a product that the customers are women. But in my sense, there's so much stigma around sex tech that I've actually gotten like very little success with women investors. And some very famous angel like investors who are women have told me like, I love what you're doing, but I don't have the reputation yet to take this level of risk. So this is another thing. Like if you're a female investor, you're also trying to make it.
Yeah.
Right? So think about that. Like you're taking a risk and you're going after them, but you're also like, they're also, under so much scrutiny as well. So it's just a shit show out there, and we just need to keep like we just need to win. That's why I climbed back. I gotta be honest with you, like people are like, oh, like I had like such a great job at 500. They're like, why would you want to go there? A, it's my dream, but B, like we just have to win. Like I'm tired of this. Like I've been to so many diversity conferences, and so it's like we just gotta win. Which Holly won. Holly's one of them.
Yes.
So fuck yeah, Holly. That's what's gonna we need. Anyways. I love Holly.
Tell us how you got over $2 million of funding. $200 million. We all want to know.
Yeah. So actually, not a lot of people know this, but our first investor was a woman, and it was a time. So there was no accelerators at the time. And I will say this. I know Andrea and I have had spoken a bit about this. I do think building relationships with venture VCs are incredibly important. I think definitely being second-time founders is probably super helpful. I'm not a second-time founder yet, but this is what I think. But also,
but you had an exit.
Yeah, we had an exit, which is great. But it's a good exit, so that's good too.
Yeah.
But I think because you know, you're exactly right, Andrea. They're taking a risk on you every time. Maha was our first investor, and every time I see her, I actually have that ABBA song going through my head, "Take a Chance on Me," because it really is like they go and they take a risk on you, and they put capital behind you, and they're looking for the best hits.
And she's very experienced and very confident. So
that's right. I'm sure she was. I was like, God, how could you invest in us? We're idiots. Like none of us. We were completely incompetent. None of us had like any managerial background. We never built a company anymore. But there was a personal relationship between our CEO and the investor, and I think that that's incredibly important, especially if you're a founder out here. Go and have that coffee, make those relationships, because then they'll get to know you. I'm assuming. I'm not on the dark side, so I don't know. But I just see that, and I'm like, oh, this completely makes sense. So I wonder in the back of my mind. So what's been very interesting about your early investors, because we raised all the way through Series E, and what's really interesting about, and I hope all of you will get to this level, and I'm sure all of you will. But when you do get to like that far into the company, you realize that actually your first investor is almost like this emotional, like they set the tone emotionally. Yeah. And I didn't quite realize this until like we were so far in, and I wonder if it was somebody else. And I've talked with other founders who have a board member that's not as supportive of them emotionally. And most of it is men. I'll be honest. I think because Maha was there, and partly she is who she is, and part of it is being a woman.
But people know her.
I mean, yeah. And I think that has been super helpful. I even seen our CEO go and use her as, in some ways, like because she just has so much history with us in terms of going there as an emotional sounding board, because it's an emotional ride for sure. There's just so many ups and downs, beginning or even later, right? Like even when you're like, oh, I made it, it's still like it's the same game. It's a lot of stress, and you can't do as much about it. That's true. I don't even know where files are stored anymore. I couldn't, like for a while we're like, we don't even know how to get in our own building. There's just so many things because somebody's doing it. You don't know everybody's name anymore. So that's something that's very different. So I personally think it would have been very different. I've also, and I think just her being a part of that, it was very interesting. I was having dinner with two other founders, and one was a woman and one was a male. And they both shared the same board member. It was a male, and it was very interesting. And he was saying they were talking about this particular investor's kind of hang up, because some investors have a hang up, and this particular investor had issues, I guess, with his father, with a family member, and really wanted to like very competitive. And I was like, it's fascinating being a fly on the wall. And what was really funny was like, the guy knew all this stuff about him, and the other founder, they're both CEOs. She's like, huh. He never shared that with me, and it was really interesting. And I was like, oh, I could see this because I see this happening. The guy was like, I guess it was just maybe guy dude stuff, and then he shared all this stuff. And so I do think it makes a big difference. I do, and I'm not the biggest fan of having all the women go to you, because I think the best means both men and women, and I don't think it's their job just to do that. But I do think be aware of a lot of kind of being a woman or a man, the gender differences.
I do want to talk about the dynamics of boards, because choosing a board carefully, and then you have to manage your board and they're managing you at the same time. It's tricky for a lot of people, and a lot of people don't pay enough attention to it. So I'll ask you about that. But I do want to tell the audience, since you probably don't know, Maha is Maha Ibrahim, a senior partner at Canaan Partners, which is a top-tier firm here in the Valley. On St. Hill Road. Sure. So we all know who she is, but So say a couple more words about the board dynamics and their interaction with you and each other, and then I'll let you guys do the same.
Sure. So early on, our board just consisted of our CEO and Maha. and a secretary, which was our legal person, right? It's usually just 3 people, and it's very small in the beginning. And actually, they met quite often, like almost every month, almost maybe. It was quite
boards
often.
Typically do.
Yeah. But as we got bigger, and it was just a lot harder as we added more investors on. And that's where you start managing a lot of things. I think early on, because it's smaller, you're just trying to get traction. You're just trying to, and you have somebody out as a sounding board. And I remember, just so you know, we actually didn't start out as a gaming company. We started out as a corporate social networking company. Then we moved into fan communities. And then it wasn't until 2009 that we moved into games. So we basically built like 3 companies in the last 10 years, pivoting.
Yeah.
And so Maha was with us early on, and some of the things like she had helped us with. And she said something really interesting. She goes, I feel like I go, you must have thought we were just such idiots, because our first product wasn't doing very well. And we're thinking about going to this thing called Facebook, and it's just growing like gangbusters. They open up their API, and she's like, yeah, go where the users are. Man, I go, you must have thought you invested in idiots. And she's like, I feel like sometimes my job is just to hold up the mirror to the entrepreneur, because sometimes you're just so in the weeds. And I think a lot of that is a bit early on, and managing the board, you're just kind of at the point of both trying to find your way, and obviously the investors doing that. Now, as it gets larger, our cadence has been a lot less in terms of meeting. It moved to 6 weeks, and then it moved to 12 weeks, and by then we had like 8 board members. We were kind of looking for a 9th, and then you get a lot more governance, and then it's a whole like production, literally, of getting the board kind of ready for the board meeting, so nobody's surprised there. It's not just more formal. And then the CEO's job is to manage the board. He's had a lot of conversations leading up to that, so that when they get into that room, nothing's a surprise. And certain things become a little bit less of a discussion, that's for sure. Before, I think a lot of things would become as a discussion, but this one was very much like, we're presenting this is our financial plan, this is why we think this strategy will hit. Funny enough, a lot of conversations would come up with around how do you know this is going to be a hit in our games, but a lot around talent as well, and kind of like, how are you sussing out some of your best talent? How are you making sure they're executing? Because that's really what you have to rely on, particularly in our space. We don't hold any inventory, so that's where our risk is.
So Shanna, your company's still pretty new. So how are you managing your board, and how do they get along with you and each other? And do you have to work at that, or is it kind of just working?
Yeah, no, we, so I had definitely a first board experience that has taught me a lot for my second board experience. My first board grew to a size too fast. It was only about 5 people, but really anything more than 1 or 2 people on your board, there is a dynamic now in the room between those people that has very little to do with your company, and it's more about their careers and their profession and all the boards they sit on and the companies they're investing in. And they can very much gang up on you at times too. So I felt that I was always like kind of playing defense a little bit, and in moments where they were agreeing on one thing that seemed totally wrong to me, but they were the majority in the room. So, and then the other learning was board observers. They don't have voting rights, but their presence in the room. So don't give it away. Don't let lots of people into your room. The more people in there, whether they're on the board officially or not, the more opinions are going to be had during the conversations. So this time around, I've been a lot more careful. Our first board member, we had no board members until we raised a Series A. We have 1 board member now, myself and our investors. There's 2 officially. We have 1 board observer. And then I bring in most of my executive team to all the meetings so that we are more...
You have critical mass.
Exactly, which is a good trick if you start a company.
That's actually smart.
Because then it definitely frames the conversation to be about the business, and we are the ones that have the most day-to-day knowledge about the business, and that way, like, when the conversation turns to something that makes no sense, the team can kind of corral it back on track. And so... a lot I learned.
Yeah. So Andrea, did you have similar experiences, or?
I actually don't have a board. Can you understand who here has a board, or like? Okay, cool. So I'm pretty early
in the future.
So I'm pretty early too. And so what I did is I created like a play board. Everyone should have a play board.
Yeah.
I believe in play boards. So because I'm pretty serious. My first company, Jess kind of managed. We had a board as well for as long as possible. She also minimized people at the board. Most people didn't have voting rights in the room, and I agree. It's about managing that. But I'm a pretty early stage. We've raised around, and but before your Series A, you don't technically probably won't have a board. So I just asked my some of my angel investors who've been operators. Most of them are operators. I prefer investors who've been operators, and then I invite them and I create boards, and I get to try out these board dynamics before I actually get to invite someone on my board. I have even just other CEO friends that are a little bit ahead of me, like Tracy Lawrence just raised, I think, her next round at Choose, and I'm like, hey Tracy, can you be on my play board? And that's been working great for me. So I think you should always have people to poke holes in your business, because in a startup, when things feel great, it's often not that great. But when things feel like things are falling apart, it's probably not falling apart. So it's really good to have people who can kind of help you see where things are good and bad, and just help you kind of poke holes in the business, whether or not you need or have a board yet.
Yeah. And so when you raise money, and you mentioned relationships, so when you raise money, you're doing it to hire. You're doing it so you can sell, so you can get customers, right. So you can get partners. Maybe you had a BD person or not. So you can keep the mic for a second and just talk about what it was like to hire and to go out and get this ecosystem or set of partners or customers around you. Did gender play a role in that? Did you feel or not?
Gender is part of who we are.
Yeah,
so I think it is, whether you are or aren't, or whether you're transgender or you're non-gender conforming, everything gets even more, right? There's intersectional challenges, right? I'm also a woman of color, being Filipino American. I didn't grow up. I remember some of my early experiences, people were just there were just class differences. I remember the first time I went into a YC barbecue, everyone made fun of McDonald's. And I remember being when I was growing up, McDonald's was amazing. Right. That was a treat. You went to church and you had McDonald's, right? But there were just these things you don't even think about, right? So, so I think we need to take this discussion further than just gender differences. I'm also a very sometimes people want to put you. I'm a very emotional and sensitive person, but I also will go to town on you and have that dominant side. And so there are ways that's helped me, that it kind of crosses and is blurs the lines. It's also things where you grew up and the fact that I come from a family that is from a lower socioeconomic place, that actually I think sometimes plays more, because when I'm talking to people, there's shared cultural norms, right? It's hard to create relationships with people you don't relate to. All right. And so I tend to get along with operators because they, we share a common language and we share a common culture. And so of course gender will matter, but it's also just about values. And I've also met women who I couldn't share fewer values with.
Right.
And I would say a lot of I always I want to lead from the left. One of my company values at O School is radical softness. Because I will be radically soft and still make a lot of money and still be a great leader, but it's not about, because I think this is the last point I'll end on. Misogyny in tech is not about women. It's about femininity. Because I meet gay men, I meet people who have really soft-spoken, I meet international people from India who have the same problems that many women in tech feel. And so we just really need to go beyond just men or women, because a lot of, people who've succeeded in tech, despite their gender, have usually just had to adopt a certain level of values, and it's just really true. And it's about femininity that's being why is it that the office manager always has the pulse on the emotions going on in the whole office? There's a lot of unpaid emotional labor happening. It doesn't matter if I was a founder. I was a co-founder of the company, but when the paper towels ran out in my office, everyone looked at me. And it's I didn't matter. It doesn't matter. So there are things that kind of transcend, and we need to reward emotional intelligence. We need to reward this emotional labor that's oh, well, that's just what their job is, right? But in both ends of the spectrum of whether you're the CEO of a company or you're the office managers, a lot of emotional qualities aren't being compensated, and that's how I think of the gender problems in tech. It's not about men or women, because we're all trying to be pushed into one way or the other, right? And that's not how I've experienced. I've experienced that we just need a more inclusive place to work often.
I agree with you, and I was just in Southeast Asia for a whole month in the fall, and a lot of the men and women who I met there were lacking in confidence. They didn't want to share their ideas. They didn't have a good network. They just behaved differently than we do, and therefore weren't as ambitious and weren't getting ahead in the same way. So I wonder, Holly, if you could say a few more words and riff on this idea of shared values, shared experience, culture.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that it's funny. I actually ended up going to lead the people side, and my background has actually been product. And how the CEO got me was he goes, you know what, Holly, we're gonna grow, and I need somebody there that I can trust. I need somebody, and values is the only way we're gonna be able to scale. And so I was like, I didn't quite understand what he meant. And now I realize like what he means is when you dump in a crap ton of people into your company, which I don't know if I totally would advise, but as you dump in more and more people, it's certainly, values is the quickest way to get people on the same page. Culture is just kind of how you do things. Sometimes, I mean, I'll probably say something that's counter to what a lot of people say. I believe culture is incredibly important and values are incredibly important, but when you're very, very small, you should definitely think about it, but you don't really need to sit like, it's like your family has a certain type of culture, that's for sure, but it's not like we write it down. Some families do, but I do notice as it gets bigger, it's very hard to kind of communicate, and that's basically how you do things. Like you just want to, like the CEO is busy trying to replicate themselves. I'm busy trying to replicate myself. That's what the founders want to do, and the only way you could do that is through culture. Values is the thing that centers it all, and then the culture is built around like kind of how. And there's really not any one right or wrong culture. Like I don't believe in that. But it definitely is much better if everybody's on the same page. And this is where I get very corporate speak. But yeah, it's true. Because you could just move people a lot faster.
So, you know, when I hire, I always take a meal with the person I'm hiring. And VCs do this too when they're looking to fund someone. And so how do you, when you hire or, you know, when you're forming these relationships, how do you, does the sense of value, this shared culture, does that play into your decisions as much as other qualifications, I guess is what I'm asking.
So actually, I just was having this conversation with our head of engineering last night. Because absolutely, we think first and foremost about the people who are joining and their core values.
You have to spend a lot of time with them.
Exactly. And like, you know, we have to work together and we have to want to work together. However, trying to build a diverse team, which diversity is a big piece of the team that we're trying to build. And we were lucky in that the first handful of people that joined all looked different, which was great because then everybody coming to interview at our company felt like, well, they don't look like each other. I might not look like them, but that doesn't matter.
I can fit. Yeah,
right?
That's great.
And so that was important. But we had this interesting conversation about, are you going to immediately like every person who comes in here to interview? And especially if we're trying to build diverse teams and diverse thinking and diverse skill sets, we may not like everybody. So like, how do we benchmark what we think is kind of like a jerky person that is just like wrong for the culture and going to bring people down versus somebody who maybe we don't, like we go to lunch and it might be awkward or you might not have something to talk about and maybe that's actually okay. And I think that concept of like, I want to go to drinks with you or I want to go to lunch with you is part of the reason that we've created such an insular culture in Silicon Valley because you're like, oh, I can imagine being friends with this person, so I'm going to hire them.
Yeah.
That's a really good point because ours started out differently. So we're all Chinese American and it's really true, likes like. And for our first 14 hires, I looked up, I go, oh my gosh, we all have black hair. A large majority have glasses too, right? And it does take, there is like a, you know, we all grew up with kind of the same immigrant parents. And so a lot of things went a lot faster. That is for sure. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that we got the best ideas. It's like, it's very much you could go faster, but are you going to go farther around things? And there is something to be had around like, so it's true, likes like, you're going to be most comfortable with people that are like you, but don't mistake that for, you know, going out of your way and being challenged a bit on, hey, you know what, you're a little bit different from me, but there may be something that you have to offer. Because reality is there's not going to be 1,500 people like you. Like in our company, there wasn't exact. And then when you turn on an office in another country, they're not going to be like you, right? It's going to be even different.
Right. And I think what's important too is like creating the, like, there's all things that are just assumed as being like something you do in tech. Like, and one thing that we're trying to unlearn in our company is like, we don't create a drinking culture, right? Because like whether I would, like, I remember Elad Gil wrote this really great hiring blog and it talked about, let's say you move fast when you're like, almost like, come on. It was almost like the I wrote an article about diversity debt in 2015, kind of like all around, like it's hard to build diverse like teams. It's hard because you have the same things that, you know, Shanna, right? Shanna talks about. And like, so what we do in our company is creating like shared values around a mission, but not like these kind of like, would I get a beer with this person, or these kind of things is what we grew up with. That's what you see ping pong tables everywhere and like these things, but it's like these are not like these don't have to be the way it is. Right? These don't have to be the way it is. And so, for example, we have a welcome letter that we send out, but it's like, hey, like, if you need a breastfeeding or chest feeding room, we're really trans inclusive at our company, right? Like, just let us know. And people always ask, well, you don't have anybody who is like thinking about parents. And I'm like, yeah, but we will never have someone who's thinking about being a parent if we don't like show them that that's something that we care about.
That's fair.
And so like, just like do it all. Or I get that you shouldn't have like, a diversity inclusion person in your team as a startup, but like, it's not that hard. Like this whole thing, $1 billion has been spent on making tech more inclusive and diverse. $1 billion. It's not that hard. Like it's, in our company, we just have a list of things like, don't commit these microaggressions. Like, like these are the norms. And like, but it's because so many of these big companies, it's too late. It's too late. And so it's so important that startups do it because we can actually change it. Like even if I marched into Twitter today and was like, all right, everybody, we're going to make this place really inclusive. Like, no, you're not going to do that. It's been set.
You do it for your own business.
It's like technical debt. Yeah. It's like technical debt, right? Diversity debt builds like technical debt. And the longer you wait, the harder it is to fix.
So I wanted to ask, go ahead and then I'll ask you a question.
I'll just give you one tip for anybody who is starting a company. Like one of the ways that we ended up with a very, very different looking team is that we put out a project assessment and people came in and they applied and it was completely color blind. Like we never saw the person. In fact, we never even read their name before they gave us
really
the
smart.
assignment. And then we would assess it and then they would get valued and then that person would bubble up and we wouldn't meet them until they were already approved for the role essentially.
Yeah.
And at that point you're saying, okay, are they like a jerk? Are they going to be here and be aggressive to people? And if the answer is no, then they're the best person
That's
for the job.
a great practice. Yeah. So what I want to ask each of you, and then we'll take a few questions from the audience, really quickly, was there somebody who influenced you? Because I tend to tell women, the CEOs of General Motors and Pepsi and IBM and Lockheed Martin and Mondelez, they're all women. And so, you can aspire to lots of different kinds of jobs and you can see women in really powerful roles, but there are men who have influenced me too. So Shanna, can you just say who was very influential for you?
The most influential person for me was Randy Pausch. He wrote The Last Lecture for anybody who's seen or read that. He was my professor at Carnegie Mellon and he changed my whole trajectory in my whole life before he wrote The Last Lecture by actually being kind of like really hard on me and putting the bar up here, and I was always failing.
That's so cool. That's really cool. Andrea?
I would say actually my co-founder Jessica Ma had the most influence on me, mostly because when she found me, I was an anti-capitalist activist for Native American languages. I'm actually a trained linguist, and I used to protest at Berkeley against capitalism. Like literally 3 years later, capitalism was in my name, like venture capitalist. Like it was this huge thing. But the reason that I'm in tech today is because a woman thought bigger for me than I thought for myself.
That's very cool. Very cool. And Holly?
I don't know if I have one big one, but this sounds very cliche, but it's so flippin' true. There are many nights where I just come home just crying and just kind of flat on my back. And it's really been my husband who's been, I always tell people, especially women, don't look for mentors, look for champions. Like these are people who believe in you. Like when you're not there and even when you don't even believe in yourself. And definitely as you hire people, do that as well, especially when you're in the growth space because people, I used to be really naive as a founder. I used to think oh yeah, everyone loves oh, it's so great. But that's so not true. You're failing all the time. Someone else can do your job better than you. And you know what? That person you hired, because they could do your job better than you, you're they could take my job too. So every day you're feeling like a fucking failure. Sorry, I'm lying. But
no, you're right.
It's so that just has really changed my life of just being able to have that strong emotional support.
That's really
there,
cool.
So.
That's really cool. Do we have now? Okay, we were going to take questions from the audience, but what we really need is caffeine. So we'll discuss these things with you in the hall. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.